All right, everybody, welcome to Behind the Brand. In this episode, we're going to talk about the evolution of Raceseng. Let's get into it. Usually I find something to talk about in between here and there. You want me to do that? No, we'll go right in? Okay, keep it. All right, so it pains me to say this, but the days of manuals are dying, and it's weird to say that because a manual shift knob's been in a car forever and a day. And me as the business owner of Raceseng, I have to figure out, well, how are we gonna evolve with the cars that we make parts for are actually changing. So we fundamentally need to take this brand, which is right now we make a lot of shift knobs, and we have to shift it. So what is the next logical evolution for us as a company is to find an area where we can combine our design language and our manufacturing capabilities into a new product. And a no-brainer for that is if shift knobs are dying, shifter paddles are increasing. The next step of this is we're gonna make paddles. What do? We've got to decide a platform to start with first. We're gonna go after the Porsche 981 market. It's a newer car. The paddles are used across a bunch of different Porsche cars. And how do we actually start this process? So for me, actually took a photo of the OEM Porsche paddle, turned the opacity down in Photoshop and scaled this 1:1. And what I'm doing here is that this little overlay is allowing me to draw concepts that are still logical and realistic in shape and form. If I have this paddle, an inch smaller than this, and I'm drawing a concept on here that is totally out of shape and proportion, when I go to the next step of this process, it's not gonna work. So this is a simple little trick that I have when I'm working on flushing the ideas out of my head about how to make them that much closer to reality, because this is still a 2D form, but I'm trying to draw in 3D geometry and a little bit of shading to just help myself develop the form in my head. At this point, the cool part about this process for me is I'm logically controlling the foundation of what Raceseng is going to be in the shifter paddle marketplace, and it comes from my head out into here. One thing I do before I get into this, I intentionally do not look at what's on the internet. I don't look in the marketplace, and the reason I do that is because I want to have what is known as what I do as a designer come out naturally, not in a way that is mimicking forms that I see on the internet or forms that I see other people using. I look for inspiration sometimes. When I'm this early in the design phase, I really want to make sure that I'm the one driving the design of the paddle itself. All right, guys. So the next step is to figure out how we're going to take these concepts and put them into the computer. And in the case like this, we actually laser scan the OEM Porsche paddle. So you're seeing our done paddle design onto the OEM paddle, and we scan that into SolidWorks, and then we reverse engineer that data. So what you're seeing here on the screen is virtually a 1-to-1 representation of an OEM Porsche paddle that I can then build my ideas on. So this process leads to a bunch of iterations of forms because sometimes when I actually get into the computer, it feels different to me and I kind of verge off in different directions, but ultimately what comes out of that is a variety of 3D printed parts that we then print and literally put onto the paddle. And there's subtle nuances to the difference of all these things, but the point is that we're slowly developing the form, the geometry, and the language of the part. And it's also helping me frame the design philosophy behind what I want this to be and do. And in my mind, I want Raceseng the parts to still have our language, but just have great design. So for me, great design in terms of this is trying to make a paddle that doesn't alienate itself to the form of the OEM paddle in shape. So if you look at the Porsche paddle here, I'm actually mimicking a lot of their geometry and coming off, so that way when this thing's bolted on, not bolted on, but adhesive onto this, it has a language that mimics the OEM, but still has some subtle details that make it look like Raceseng. And that's the key element to me, that what's gonna make this whole category successful for us, is to build in our design language onto an OEM part, but have it still be Raceseng. I also try to make sure that there's intentional form, like we just talked about, but also function. And how that developed in here was, on these 3D printed prototypes, I tried modeling in some textures on the backside that would get actually machined into the part. And after doing that, I realized that what I was modeling I didn't like, and I actually needed to use our CAM software, or the software that programs our machines, to drive that. So when we went through the prototyping phase of these paddles, we actually machined 10 paddles that had 10 different textures on the backside. And it was a relationship where I would edit the program, go out into the machine, cut one part, take it off and feel it, make changes. And we repeated that process at least 10 times to get to something as subtle and cool as these lines back here that just slowly hug the shape. But when you actually put your fingers on the backside of the paddle, it has a nice texture. It's not obtrusive, and it also sort of gives you a reference of where you are on the paddle, which is a nice feel. It's a little bit of texture. It's not too much, and I think it also has a great look into actually accentuating the form that you're getting on the backside of the paddle. After I was done in CAD with this thing, we did make those prototypes, and I realized that I had a complete snafu on my part. And it wasn't that I didn't integrate the logo, but I'm big into logo integration in a way that Raceseng just doesn't look like it's just smacked on the part. I always try to build form into it. So this was one of our prototypes, and I had an idea one night, like it often happens when I'm falling asleep, about how to integrate our form into it. And I remodeled the whole thing to build in this very, very subtle detail here. You can see it on this side of the paddle, but Raceseng is engraved on the outside. And I did that so that way when the driver's touching these, it doesn't have a logo on the front of it. That way when he's driving the car, he isn't seeing Raceseng constantly, but it's on the side of the paddle, and you'll see it when you're getting in and out, and your passenger will also see it. But the whole point of this is that this back chamfer detail actually comes up and hugs the Raceseng that we machine in after the part's after it's engraved. Has a very cool look to it, and it's definitely fulfills kind of the way that I want to have this analogy between form and function.
What do you mean, like inserts and all? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Well, let me replace that one. Ah, the original prototypes. That happened to me last time. I went to walk and this wasn't attached.
Oh yeah, just throw it.
Well, when I sit on it, it hurts.
Oh yeah.
I love coming out and seeing this in process, because this is one of our not older products, but this is our caster camera plates. And it's just neat seeing something still have duration of life that we did a couple years ago. Still looks great. That's when we talk about great design around here. That is critical for us, is to make something that was done 4 or 5 years ago and it still looks awesome today. Ooh.
That's the new stuff.
Ooh, they're pretty. Now these did turn out. I mean, the printing is super crisp. So on this product, I really wanted to raise the level of our customer experience. I've always wanted to do a rigid box packaging. I've never done it. I've had to learn it. I've had to learn about materials and finishes and processes. And I wanted to walk you guys through what this customer unboxing looks like. So this is our new shifter paddle packaging. You notice it's almost got nothing on it outside of Raceseng on the front. And then on the side where the user has to engage with this box, it has Enjoy the Drive, which is the heart of what we want you guys to do with our parts. And then this little orange tag is sort of a call out to say, interact with me. So when you pull this out, the first thing to pop up is our little story card. And this card kind of describes the heart and heritage of Raceseng as a company. On the inside of this, it's our story. On the other side is just a little tidbit for me to let you guys know that it's awesome when you share the experience you have with our parts. And on the back side, you know, it just has our little mantra that these parts are fully made in the USA. And of course, I play around with printing details. It says clear foil on it, just to build in the same language I put into design and machining. I also learned in printing techniques. And you know, for instance, the Raceseng is done here in a clear foil. You probably can't see it. You know, behind that is the R exposed, and you see the paddle behind there. And then there's this little intentional cutout that your finger fits into. So the point of this is that you pull this box out, And I sort of hint and give you a peek of the part that you're about to experience. But the whole point is that you pull this out, and on the inside then is your paddles. And you know, this process for the consumer is analogous to the same heart and passion I put into this stuff. And that I want you to have that same emotion when you're getting these parts. That, wow, you know, look at these things, and you pull them out and you pick them out of the foam, which is perfectly cupping them. And I even have 2 openings here where your fingers perfectly fit in and pull these parts out. And you take it out and you look at it. And then I'm hoping that people admire the work and the effort and the design that we put into these parts. So I'm anxious to see how we do in this category. This is our first venture into it. These are going to be released later this month. I hope you guys like them. I hope you guys see some people using them, and we are going to be extending these to VW, Audi, Mercedes, also Ford Mustang we thought about doing. So we're going to do the same thing we do with shift knobs, but for paddles. So until next time, guys, enjoy the drive.